My name's Grandpa Harry, and before I tell you what my cousins did, let me paint the picture right. I've spent most of my life in a workshop that smells like sawdust, motor oil, and good honest labor. Every tool on my wall has a story behind it. Some came from jobs that nearly broke my back. Some came from the early days when I couldn't afford much more than a rusted wrench and hope. And some were gifts from old friends who believed in me long before I learned to believe in myself. So when I say those tools were a part of me, I don't mean that lightly. It all started on a Thursday morning, the kind where the air still has a bite to it and the world feels half asleep. I was sanding down a piece of maple for a client when I heard voices outside, loud ones, the kind of voices that show up before the trouble does. My cousins, the three loudest mouths in the county. They strutted in like they owned the place, slapping backs, talking big, acting like they had business being near anything delicate. I knew that energy, that swagger. Anytime they came around, something went missing: respect, money, or peace. They said they were just stopping by, but their eyes were already darting across my workshop like kids in a candy store. I tried to keep things light, offered them coffee, asked them what brought them over. But they didn't want conversation. They wanted leverage. They started talking about how construction was slow, how their crew needed better equipment, and how family should help family. And each time they said family, their eyes flicked to my tool racks. I felt something cold slide down my spine. Then they said it, the line that would change everything. "Come on, Harry. You owe a little family tax." Family tax. Like stealing from me was some kind of tradition. Like the years I'd helped them, loaned them gear, bailed them out of messes, meant nothing. Before I could get a word in, they started grabbing. Saws, drills, impact drivers, laser levels, a welding kit I'd saved months for, gone. They loaded up over $9,000 worth of my livelihood while laughing like it was a joke I wasn't in on. And the worst part? The way they looked at me while doing it. Not angry, not desperate, just superior. Like I was the old relic who should feel grateful they even remembered my name. When they slammed the truck door shut, one of them winked at me and said, "You should be proud, Harry. Your old junk's finally gonna get some real use." They drove off with half my workshop rattling around in the back of that pickup truck, leaving me standing in the dust like a man who just had his past and present ripped right out of his hands. I wish I could tell you I yelled, or chased after them, or even slammed a fist on the workbench, but all I felt was this heavy, sinking quiet. The kind you get when someone you trusted shows you exactly how little you mean to them. If you've ever had family take advantage of your kindness, if you've ever felt that sting of being used because you're the safe one, the quiet one, the one who won't fight back, then you understand that silence. But let me tell you something right here at the start. What they took that day wasn't the end. Not even close. Stick with me. Because what happened after that? That's where the ground really started to shake, after they pulled out of my driveway with half my workshop rattling around in the back of their truck. I stood there for a long moment staring at the empty spaces on my walls. Tools I'd used for decades. Tools that had built homes, repaired engines, and kept food on my table. Tools that held memories. And somehow, seeing those hooks bare, it felt like looking at ribs under torn skin. But here's the painful truth. I'd been here before, not with theft this bold, no, but with the feeling of being the family doormat, the guy everyone assumed would just shrug, smile, and take it. I'd let small things slide over the years. A loan that never got paid back. A truck they borrowed for a weekend and returned with an empty tank and a cracked taillight. Cousins like mine don't wake up one day and decide to steal from you. They practice. They test you. And I guess I'd passed all their tests without even realizing I was being graded. Still, this was different. This wasn't borrowing or bad manners. This was a breach, a violation. But when I tried to confront them, that's when I learned something I wasn't prepared for. I drove to the job site they were working on. Big place, too. A commercial remodel right in the heart of town. Their trucks were lined up in a row, music blasting, sawdust flying. Their crew of 12 looked like they were having a good time at my expense. I pulled up, got out, and walked across the gravel toward my cousins, who were standing around a makeshift workbench. And there it was, my gear, my drills, my saws, my compressor, all set up like they owned it. One of them was even using my favorite impact driver, the one that fit perfectly in my hand. I tried to keep my voice steady. "You took my tools. Bring them back." They barely acknowledged me. One of them kept drilling into a support beam. Another smirked and sipped from a can of soda. Finally, the oldest turned to me with that mocking grin I'd known since childhood. "Harry, you're too old to be using half this stuff anyway. Think of it as a donation." "A donation?" I repeated, feeling heat climb up my neck. "Family tax," he said again, shrugging. "You should be proud your tools are helping real workers." A couple of the crew laughed. Not because it was funny, because they wanted to stay on the good side of the men who signed their checks. I felt the sting of that humiliation deep, and you don't forget a sting like that. I reached for my toolbox on the table, but the youngest cousin slapped his hand on it before I could pick it up. "Touch it again," he said low, "and I'll call the cops myself. Tell them you're trespassing and causing trouble." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You stole from me," I said. "It's our word against yours," he fired back. 12 of us, one of you. Who do you think they'll believe?" And here's the sick part. He wasn't wrong. I'd been quiet my whole life. They'd been loud. I didn't have proof. They had a crew ready to lie through their teeth. They knew they had the advantage. They'd planned it. Maybe not the details, but the dynamic. Oh, they were counting on it. I left that site feeling like a man walking without his shadow. The next morning, I filed a police report anyway. The officer listened, but I could see the hesitation in his eyes. Without receipts or serial numbers or video proof, it wasn't likely to go anywhere. When he finished taking my statement, he gave me a look, the kind men give when they want to say something, but their badge won't let them. "Best thing you can do, sir," he said quietly, "is be careful who you call family." That hit harder than I expected. Driving home, I felt empty. My workshop echoed with every step I took. I tried sweeping. I tried reorganizing. I tried sitting at my bench like I usually did when I needed clarity. But the silence followed me like a shadow that didn't belong to me anymore. Later that night, I pulled up my phone and saw something that turned the knife. My cousins had posted pictures online of the tools, my tools, lined up neatly at the job site with a caption that read, "Upgrading the gear. Thanks to the universe for the blessings." Blessings. They called stealing from me a blessing. That's when something cracked inside me, not in anger, but in this deep, tired place I didn't know existed. A place where pride sleeps until it's kicked awake. The next day, I went to a small coffee shop I'd been visiting for years. It's a quiet spot, tucked away, the kind of place where the owner knows your name and your usual order. I sat down with my mug, trying to steady myself. And then it happened. A man I'd never seen before sat down 2 seats away, reading the business section of the newspaper. He glanced over and said, "You're Harry, right? The woodworker?" I nodded slowly. "I heard your cousins contract under Rockford Construction," he said casually. "Strange thing, heard the company's looking for a buyer. They're keeping it quiet, but the owner's desperate to get out." I stared at him, not quite processing. "You sure?" I asked. "As sure as a man can be," he said, tapping the paper. "Company's on its last legs. Whole crew's at risk if it goes under." My heart thumped once, hard. I didn't know it then, but that moment, that little conversation over lukewarm coffee, was the first tremor before the earthquake. The universe wasn't blessing my cousins. It was warning them. And I was about to become the storm they never saw coming. I didn't go home right away after hearing that. I drove around town with the radio off, letting the quiet settle while my mind turned gears it hadn't touched in years. Rockford Construction. I knew the name. Everyone in our county did. They weren't the biggest outfit around, but they'd been steady for decades. Solid contracts, good reputation, and my cousins had built their whole identity around being part of that crew. If that company really was up for sale, that meant something bigger than paychecks was on the table. It meant leverage, direction, control. But even then, the thought of me owning something like that felt ridiculous. I wasn't a businessman. I was a man with calloused hands and a workshop full of empty hooks. But still, the idea lingered. That afternoon, I drove to the small industrial area on the edge of town where the company was headquartered. I didn't even plan to go inside. I just wanted to look at it. Maybe see if the place looked as shaky as the rumor claimed. But when I pulled up, the truth hit me right in the eye. It looked tired. Not broken, but worn out like a man who'd been worked too hard for too long. Trucks with fading paint. A yard half organized and half forgotten. Workers moving with that slow drag that says morale's low. And in the office window, an older man with silver hair sat hunched over a stack of folders. I sat in my truck for 5 minutes, then 10. I told myself I was just observing, just passing through. But eventually my hand reached for the door handle on its own. Inside, the office smelled faintly of old paperwork and stress. The man behind the desk looked up like he hadn't seen a visitor in weeks. "Can I help you?" he asked with a tired voice. I told him my name. Told him I worked with my hands. Told him I'd heard a rumor he might be looking for a buyer. And at first he stiffened like a man bracing for a fight. But then something softened in his shoulders, and he nodded toward the chair across from him. We talked for nearly an hour. His name was Warren. He'd owned Rockford Construction for 36 years, built it from a one-truck operation to a full-size contracting outfit. But his health was slipping. His wife wanted him to retire, and he was exhausted from chasing payments and managing men who didn't respect the work anymore. "I've had 4 potential buyers in the last 6 months," he told me. "All of them suit and tie fellas, and every one of them wanted to gut the place or drown it in debt." "What do you want?" I asked. He looked at a photo on his desk. Younger version of him standing in front of a freshly framed building, proud as a father. "I want someone who gives a damn," he said. "Someone who understands work, real work. Someone who's not trying to build an empire, just a legacy." I didn't know what to say. Me, a legacy? The idea felt too big for a man who'd just had half his tools stolen. But then he flipped a ledger around so I could see numbers, losses, missed payments, contracts about to fall apart. Rockford wasn't just tired, it was bleeding out. "I'm not asking for top dollar," he said. "I'm asking for someone who'll do right by the men who've worked here, and by the name on the building." I left that office with a folder under my arm and a pressure in my chest I hadn't felt in years. Possibility. But it wasn't just the company that pushed me forward. It was the fact that my cousins were tied to it. Their entire crew, their income, their pride, their bragging rights, their stolen confidence. And suddenly, for the first time since they walked out with my tools, I felt something shift inside me. Not revenge, not anger, just alignment. Like the world had quietly moved a puzzle piece into place. Back home, I pulled everything out of my filing cabinet. Old deeds, savings bonds I'd forgotten about. Paperwork from years back when I'd bought and fixed up a small piece of land. A piece I never developed. A piece I'd written off as maybe someday. Turns out someday had arrived. That land, untouched for nearly 2 decades, was now worth more than I ever expected. Enough to put me in the running as a real buyer. I didn't sleep that night. My mind kept drifting between 2 empty walls. The bare hooks in my workshop and the hollowed-out company yard I'd seen that afternoon. Both stripped, both neglected, both waiting for someone to care again. The next morning I called Warren. "I want to see the books again," I said. He told me to come by. By noon I'd signed a confidentiality agreement and was going through everything. Contracts, debts, upcoming bids, insurance documents. It was overwhelming, but not impossible. It reminded me of fixing an old engine. You don't panic, you just break it down piece by piece. By evening, I called an appraiser about my land. By midnight, I knew what my next step had to be. The following week was a blur of meetings, signatures, and quiet determination. I didn't tell a soul what I was doing, especially not my cousins. They were too busy posting videos of themselves on job sites using my stolen tools like trophies. And the more they bragged, the more certain I became. Then, on a Tuesday morning so ordinary it almost felt wrong, Warren slid a set of keys across the desk toward me. "Harry," he said, "the company's yours." I didn't smile. I didn't cheer. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt steady. Because I finally understood something. They hadn't taken my tools to weaken me. They'd done it to reveal me. And the man who walked out of that office wasn't the one they'd stolen from. He was the man holding their future in the palm of his hand. The first morning I walked into Rockford Construction as the owner, the sky was still dark. Not because I needed to be there early, but because I wanted the quiet before anyone knew what had changed. It's strange walking into a place you used to pass by without a second thought. The air feels different. The walls feel like they're whispering questions. And every step reminds you you're carrying a responsibility you never planned on having. I walk through the yard slowly, running my hand along the cold rails of the scaffolding, feeling the grit on the old workbenches. I wasn't thinking about revenge or payback. I was thinking about all the men whose livelihoods depended on this place. Men who didn't steal, didn't manipulate, didn't believe they were owed anything. Men who had families, mortgages, kids who looked up to them. Good workers buried under bad leadership. And then there were my cousins. They rolled into the yard around 7 a.m., loud as always. Music blasting. Laughing like they hadn't spent the past 2 weeks stealing from me and bragging about it online. None of them knew the company had been sold. The previous owner had agreed to keep it quiet until I decided how to handle the transition. I stood near the back of the warehouse, half hidden behind stacks of lumber, watching them unload their trucks, watching them use my stolen tools like they belonged to them, watching their crew act like kings walking into their court. And every minute of it carved the truth deeper into me. These weren't men who valued hard work. These were men who expected the world to bend for them. Later that morning, I met with Warren one final time. He walked me through payroll, contracts, insurance policies, everything I needed to know. When we finished, he rested a hand on my shoulder and said, "Harry, you're the right man for this. Don't let anyone tell you different." It hit harder than I expected. I hadn't heard someone say something like that to me since my father passed. When he left, I stood alone in the conference room. Sunlight was coming in through the blinds in thin golden stripes. I looked at the long table, the stacks of documents, the keys in my pocket, and I knew it was time to stop being a ghost in this story. That afternoon, I sent out a company-wide message. Mandatory meeting tomorrow at 8 a.m. Attendance required. No details, no warnings, no clues. The cousins would be there, because if there was one thing they understood, it was following the money. They feared anyone who signed their checks. That night I barely slept. Not out of fear, just anticipation. My mind kept replaying their laughter as they loaded up the tools they stole. The way the youngest slapped his hand over mine like I was some kind of trespasser. The way they called it family tax, as if my hard work belonged to them by birthright. But there was something else mixed with the anticipation, a kind of calm I didn't recognize. Like I'd stepped into the life I was supposed to be living. Like the universe finally let me in on the joke everyone else had been laughing at. Morning came slow. When I arrived at the building, every truck was already parked out front. The conference room buzzed with voices, men joking, men complaining, men bragging. And my cousins right in the center of it all, feet kicked up, loud as ever. I didn't enter right away. I stood outside the glass doors, watching them through the reflection. And for a moment I felt the old version of myself tug at my sleeve. The version who avoided confrontation, who let people walk all over him, who thought keeping the peace meant losing himself. But that man was gone. I pushed the doors open. The sound in the room dropped off like someone cut a wire. Conversations died mid-sentence. Jaws slackened. Even the cousins straightened up, confusion flickering across their faces. "Morning," I said, walking to the head of the table. A hush washed over the room. My oldest cousin forced a laugh. "Harry, what are you doing here? This a surprise inspection or something?" They thought they were safe behind jokes. They always had. I rested my hands on the table. "Let's get started." A few of the foremen exchanged glances. They'd been told nothing. They weren't sure what this was. But they could feel the shift in the air. I took a breath and said it plain, steady, without a hint of triumph. "I'm the new owner of Rockford Construction." The room froze. My cousins' faces went through 3 transformations: confusion, disbelief, and finally something close to panic. The youngest scoffed. "No, seriously, who's the meeting really for?" I slid the signed documents across the table. The company seal, the transfer of ownership, my signature, Warren's, the notarization. Silence dropped like a hammer. One of them tried to speak and only managed a stuttering noise. Another muttered, "This is some kind of joke." The crew members looked around nervously, suddenly unsure whether they should even be in the same room. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I just laid out the truth they had tried so hard to keep from ever touching me. As of last week, I own this company, and that means I'm responsible for what happens here, all of it. I placed another stack of documents on the table: performance reports, safety violations, reckless behavior on job sites, photos of their crew using my stolen tools, screenshots of them bragging online, statements from clients, risk assessments, insurance complaints. I wasn't angry. I was prepared. You didn't just steal from me, I said quietly. You put this entire company in danger, and you put these men's livelihoods at risk. The room was dead silent. Even the air seemed afraid to move. I looked each of my cousins in the eye, one by one, slowly, steadily. You crossed a line, and today, you face the consequences. I reached into a folder and pulled out 4 envelopes. Termination letters, their names printed on each. After everything they'd taken, after all the humiliation they'd thrown my way, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult them. I didn't rub their faces in it. I simply slid the envelopes across the table. This is me taking back what's mine. And for the first time in their lives, they were completely, utterly silent. They didn't open the envelopes right away. I think part of them still believed this was posturing, a scare tactic, some theatrical warning meant to humble them. My oldest cousin just stared at his, like the paper itself had personally insulted him. Another drummed his fingers on the table, trying to look bored and failing spectacularly. The youngest leaned back in his chair with that same smirk he always wore before doing something stupid. I waited. When the oldest finally tore the envelope open, the room felt like it leaned in with him. His eyes scanned the page, moving slow at first, then faster, then freezing halfway down. He went pale. Harry, you can't be serious. I'm completely serious. He shoved the letter at his brothers, as if the paper might burn him if he held it any longer. They snatched it up, and I watched the same expression pass over their faces one by one. Disbelief collapsing into fear, fear snapping into anger, anger melting into a kind of stunned, pathetic confusion. You're firing us, one of them finally managed. Yes, but we're family. I met his eyes. You should have thought about that before you treated me like a joke. The youngest scoffed and stood, trying to reclaim the room with sheer volume. Man, this is insane. You think you're better than us because you bought the place? You think you get to play boss? I didn't play anything, I said calmly. I bought the company you depend on. I'm responsible for everyone who works here, and I don't trust people who steal from me, or brag about it. He opened his mouth again, but his voice cracked halfway through the first word. The fear was setting in, real fear. The kind that changes a man's posture, makes him suddenly aware of the ground under his feet. The kind that forces him to realize consequences are real. Some of the other crew members looked down at the table, uncomfortable. Some looked relieved, like they'd been waiting for someone to finally hold these guys accountable. I slid one more document forward, a printed screenshot of their group chat, laughing about family tax, calling me gullible, calling me useless, mocking the idea that I'd ever stand up for myself. This, I said quietly, was the moment I made my decision. Not because you stole from me, but because you enjoyed it. The room stayed still. I could hear a forklift beeping outside, someone's boots shuffling in the hallway. Even the flickering light in the far corner seemed louder than the men sitting across from me. For once, my cousins had no words. One of the foremen cleared his throat gently, like he wanted to diffuse the moment without stepping into it. Harry, and what do you want us to do? I turned to him and spoke so the entire room could hear. I want a company where men respect the work, where they show up on time, where nobody gets special treatment because of a last name, and where the tools we use belong to the men who earned them, not to thieves. Someone murmured, Amen. My cousins looked around, realizing, maybe for the first time, that the room wasn't theirs anymore. Respect had shifted. Authority had shifted. The hierarchy they believed was permanent had dissolved in the span of a single morning. Get your things, I told them. Your employment ends today. Security will escort you off the property. The youngest slammed his fist on the table, but it sounded hollow, weak, a gesture without weight. This is a mistake, Harry. A huge mistake. You're cutting off your own bloodline over some stupid tools? No, I said. I'm cutting out rot before it spreads. Something clicked in his expression. Not understanding, but recognition. The understanding would come later, when the anger spent itself and the consequences remained. "Fine," he spat. "You'll regret this." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. They stormed out of the room in a chaotic, muttering cluster. Red-faced, humiliated, unsure who to blame except the one man they never expected to stand up to them. When the door slammed behind them, the room exhaled as if it had been holding its breath. One of the crew leaders, a quiet gray-bearded man named Benton, raised his hand slightly. Sir, what do you want us to do now?" "Get back to work," I said, softening for the first time. "We're going to rebuild this place, and we're going to do it right." Men nodded, already relieved to have direction. Some clapped me on the shoulder as they passed. Some just gave a short nod, but there was respect in their eyes. Real respect, not the forced politeness they had shown the old management. When the room emptied, I sat alone at the head of the table, the spot where Warren had sat only a week before. The sun had climbed higher, throwing long bars of light across the polished wood. And it hit me, really hit me, that I'd crossed a threshold I could never go back through. I wasn't the quiet relative anymore, the one they expected to step aside, the one they could push around. I had stepped into a version of myself my father would have recognized. A version that took responsibility instead of swallowing humiliation. A version that didn't confuse kindness with weakness. After a few minutes, I got up and walked through the building, out into the yard, past the crew setting up equipment, past the trucks, past the stacks of material. I could feel eyes on me. Not suspicious, not mocking, just curious, watching, waiting to see what kind of leader I'd be. I stopped near the gate and saw a small pile of my tools sitting by the fence where security had stacked the items found in my cousin's trucks. Some were old, some had sentimental value, some were brand new. All of them had been taken because my cousins believed I wouldn't, or couldn't, stop them. I rested my hand on the handle of one of the hammers. My father's initials were still carved into the wooden grip. For the first time since this whole mess began, I felt something warm in my chest. Not pride, not triumph, just certainty. I wasn't done. There were still ripples coming. Still consequences my cousins hadn't realized yet. Still a reckoning beyond today's firing. But that was for later. For now, I lifted the hammer, brushed off the dust, and whispered to myself, "Let's get to work." I didn't plan on seeing them again so soon. A week passed after the firing, a strange, quiet week where the yard felt calmer, cleaner, more focused. I walked through the place every morning with coffee in hand, greeting crews who were actually on time, checking inventory that suddenly stayed where it belonged, and watching a company slowly find its backbone again. But trouble has a way of circling back when it feels embarrassed. It was early Friday, sky still gray with dawn, when security called me to the gate. "Harry, your cousins are here." I felt that old weight settle in my chest. Not fear, not even anger anymore. Just the tired understanding that some lessons take longer to sink in. They were standing outside the fence, pacing like wolves shut out of a campfire circle. Same three faces, same loud energy. But something was different. They weren't dressed for work. They weren't swaggering. They just looked cornered. When I walked up, they straightened as if I were the one they needed to impress. The oldest spoke first, always the self-appointed leader. "We need to talk." "You had your talk," I said. "This is different." I folded my arms. "Then talk." He swallowed, and that right there told me more than any speech could have. "We can't get hired anywhere. Not in this county, not anywhere close. Word gets around fast." "Word gets around when you earn a reputation," I said. The middle cousin stepped forward, desperation cracking his voice. "Come on, Harry. You know we're good at what we do. We just made some mistakes." "Mistakes?" I raised an eyebrow. "You didn't forget to return a wrench. You stole thousands of dollars worth of equipment. You bragged about it. You called it a family tax. That's not a mistake. That's character." They flinched. The youngest, who had always relied on volume over logic, suddenly didn't have much volume left. "We've got mortgages, kids, bills. We can't just start over." For a moment, one thin, flickering moment, I felt a shadow of sympathy. We may not have been close, but we shared childhoods, grandparents, holidays. I'd seen them grow from loud boys into loud men. I'd bailed them out of trouble when they were too proud to admit they needed help. But everyone has a turning point. Mine was the moment they laughed while loading my tools into their truck. "What exactly are you asking?" I said. They looked at each other like they'd rehearsed it. "We want our jobs back." I exhaled slowly, letting the morning air cool the heat behind my ribs. "No." The oldest tried to mask the panic rising in his face. "Harry, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable. I won't put this company at risk to fix problems you created." "But we're family," the youngest snapped. "That excuse expired the moment you treated me like someone beneath you." He opened his mouth again, but the oldest put a hand on his arm, silencing him. Then he turned to me with something that wasn't quite humility, but close. "Then, can you at least give us a reference? Something that says we weren't fired for stealing?" Now that made me laugh, not cruelly, just in disbelief. "You want me to lie? We just need something to get back on our feet." I looked at them. Really looked. 3 grown men standing on the other side of a fence they once believed they'd never have to approach from the outside. Their pride had deflated. Their certainty had evaporated. Their arrogance had cracked open like an egg on pavement. And still they hadn't said the one thing that mattered. No apology, no acknowledgement, no ownership, just self-preservation. "Until you 3 understand the difference between being wrong and being caught," I said, "there's nothing I can do for you." They stood there stunned, as if they'd expected me to cave under the weight of guilt that wasn't mine. The middle cousin pressed his palms together like a man trying to hold on to something slipping through his fingers. "Harry, please, just tell us what it'll take." I could have given a long speech. I could have listed everything they'd done. I could have broken it down with poetic justice. Instead, I said the truth. "Grow up." Silence. Then the oldest exhaled, not in anger this time, but defeat. Real, heavy defeat. The kind that settles in the shoulders. "Fine," he said quietly. "Don't help us, but don't pretend you're better than us." "I'm not better," I said. "I'm just done letting you treat me like I'm worse." They turned to leave, but before they could take more than a few steps, I called out, "And someday, when you're ready to take responsibility instead of shortcuts, I'll listen, but not until then." They didn't respond. They just kept walking. 3 silhouettes shrinking against the morning light, each one carrying a weight they'd built with their own hands. Security closed the gate behind them with a metallic finality that echoed through the yard. And when I walked back inside, every man who saw me, foremen, laborers, truck drivers, office staff, gave a small nod. The kind of nod that says, "That's leadership." Not loud, not showy, just steady, clear, unshakable. That afternoon, after the workday wrapped and the hum of machinery quieted, I sat in my office and looked at the toolbox I'd kept on a shelf, the one with my father's initials on the hammer grip. I picked it up. The weight felt familiar, solid, true, and I thought about cycles, the kind we inherit, the kind we break, and the kind we choose to build instead. My cousins had spent their lives believing treatment without consequences was a birthright. But I'd learned something they hadn't. Family doesn't mean immunity. Family means responsibility, and sometimes responsibility looks like closing a gate. Before shutting down for the night, I recorded a quick message for the folks watching my channel. Something simple, honest, and from the heart. If you've ever had someone steal from you, your things, your trust, your peace, I want you to hear this. You're allowed to protect what's yours. You're allowed to demand respect. And you're allowed to walk away from people who don't know how to be family. If this story hit home for you, stick around. I've got more stories, more lessons, and more truth coming your way. Then I smiled, clicked off the camera, and whispered, "On to the next chapter." And if you've ever had to close a gate on someone you cared about, hear me when I say this. Protecting your dignity is never the wrong choice. If this story gave you strength or even just a moment of clarity, stay with me. There's more where that came from. Because next time, I'm sharing the story of the nephew who thought he could rewrite our family history by forging my signature on a land deed, and how he learned that some old men keep receipts longer than grudges. Trust me, you won't want to miss that one.